Have you ever discovered that the greatest theft in a family happened long before anyone realized something precious was missing? The morning we buried my mother began beneath a grey autumn sky that matched the silence hanging over our family. The small country church where friends and neighbors gathered overlooked the same quiet town where my parents had spent nearly 50 years building a life together. Everyone spoke softly about my mother's kindness, her homemade apple pies, her beautiful flower garden, and the way she never allowed anyone to leave her house hungry. Listening to those memories should have brought comfort, yet I could not ignore the uneasy feeling growing inside me each time my older sister, Caroline, smiled politely at relatives before quickly stepping away to answer another phone call. It was unlike her to seem distracted during something so important. After the service ended, our family returned to Mother's old farmhouse. The familiar white porch, weathered rocking chairs, and giant maple tree looked exactly as they had throughout my childhood. Even the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen reminded me of countless Sunday afternoons spent laughing around the old wooden dining table. Everything appeared unchanged except the one person who had always made the house feel alive. While neighbors filled the kitchen with casseroles and quiet conversations, I wandered into Mother's bedroom. Her reading glasses still rested neatly beside the Bible on the nightstand. A knitted blanket remained folded at the foot of her bed exactly as she had left it. I gently touched the edge of the quilt she had sewn decades earlier and whispered that I hoped she knew how deeply she was loved. For a brief moment, grief replaced every other thought. Then I heard Caroline calling everyone into the living room. Our family attorney, Mr. Harrison, had arrived earlier than expected. He carried a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to his father before him, and he greeted us with the same quiet professionalism he had shown our parents for years. My younger brother, Michael, sat beside me while Caroline chose the chair closest to Mr. Harrison without saying a word. The room felt strangely tense despite the peaceful afternoon sunlight pouring through the windows. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat gently before explaining that Mother had updated her estate plan several years earlier. He unfolded several documents and began reading carefully. At first everything sounded ordinary. Personal belongings would be distributed according to written instructions. Family photographs would remain available to everyone. Charitable donations would be made to the local library and church. Then his voice paused before reaching the final pages. He looked up briefly and continued. According to Mother's most recent will, ownership of the farmhouse, every savings account, the investment portfolio, and nearly every remaining asset would pass entirely to Caroline. Michael and I would each receive one keepsake item and a small personal gift. The room became completely silent. I stared at the attorney, convinced I had misunderstood what he had just read. My mother had always insisted that everything would someday be shared equally among her 3 children. I slowly turned toward Caroline. Instead of surprise, her face remained calm. She lowered her eyes only for a moment before quietly folding her hands together, as though she had been expecting every word that had just been spoken. For several long seconds no one spoke. The old grandfather clock in the corner became the loudest sound in the room, each steady tick reminding us that life had continued moving forward while ours seemed frozen in place. Michael shifted uneasily beside me, his eyes fixed on Mr. Harrison as though waiting for him to smile and explain that he had accidentally read the wrong document. That explanation never came. Caroline remained remarkably composed. She quietly thanked the attorney for his time before reaching for a glass of water from the side table. Her calmness unsettled me more than the contents of the will itself. I had expected disbelief, confusion, perhaps even tears. Instead, she behaved as though every sentence had unfolded exactly as she anticipated. Mr. Harrison gently closed the folder in front of him and looked around the room. "I understand this may come as a surprise," he said carefully. "Your mother reviewed these documents personally and signed them in my office with 2 witnesses present. Everything was completed according to state law." Michael leaned forward. "There has to be some mistake," he said. "Mom told us more than once that everything would be divided equally." The attorney nodded respectfully. "She may have said that at one time. I can only speak to the document she signed." I turned toward Caroline, searching her face for answers. "Did you know about this?" I asked quietly. She hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice before answering. Mother mentioned that she had updated some paperwork a few years ago. She never explained the details. Her response sounded carefully measured, revealing just enough to appear honest while leaving every important question unanswered. I wanted to believe her, yet something deep inside me whispered that the truth was more complicated. The afternoon slowly dissolved into awkward conversations as neighbors began returning home. One by one, relatives offered polite condolences before leaving the farmhouse. Eventually only the three of us remained along with Mr. Harrison. Before departing, the attorney handed Caroline a small envelope containing several property documents and quietly reminded her to contact his office the following week regarding the transfer process. I noticed the envelope had already been prepared before he arrived, as though no disagreement had ever been expected. After the front door closed behind him, silence filled the farmhouse once again. Michael walked toward the kitchen without saying a word. I followed him a few moments later and found him standing beside the window overlooking Mother's beloved flower garden. "This does not feel right," he whispered. "Not because of the money. Because it does not sound like Mom." I nodded slowly. She always believed fairness mattered more than possessions. We both looked outside at the white roses blooming beneath the afternoon sun. Mother had planted them with our grandmother many years earlier, proudly telling us they would remind future generations that love should always outlive arguments. As I stood there remembering those words, another memory quietly surfaced. Several months before Mother's health began declining, Grandma had visited the farmhouse for Thanksgiving. After dinner she had taken my hand and smiled in that gentle way only she could. One day, she had whispered, "If this family ever loses its way, remember that the truth has a habit of waiting patiently." At the time I assumed she was simply sharing another piece of grandmotherly wisdom. Standing in Mother's kitchen now, those words suddenly carried a weight they had never held before. I looked toward the hallway leading to Grandma's old bedroom, a room that had remained untouched for years, and for reasons I could not explain, I felt the quiet certainty that our family's story had not truly begun with Mother's will. It had started long before any of us realized that something important had been hidden away, waiting for the right moment to be found. That evening I could not bring myself to leave the farmhouse. Michael stayed as well, saying he did not feel comfortable allowing Mother's house to become nothing more than another piece of paperwork before either of us understood what had happened. Caroline told us she needed to meet with the attorney early the following week and quietly excused herself before sunset, promising that we would discuss practical arrangements after everyone had time to process the day. I watched her car disappear down the long gravel driveway beneath the old maple trees, and for the first time in my life I felt as though I was looking at a stranger instead of my sister. The farmhouse grew remarkably quiet after she left. Every room carried echoes of Mother's gentle routines. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh coffee. A half-finished knitting project rested beside her favorite chair in the living room exactly where she had left it. Nothing inside the house suggested a woman preparing to leave almost everything to only one of her children. Michael and I spent the evening sorting through family photographs instead of speaking much. Each picture seemed to tell the same story. Birthdays were celebrated equally. Christmas mornings showed identical gifts beneath the tree. Family vacations, school graduations, and countless Sunday dinners reflected parents who worked hard to treat each of us fairly. "Does any of this make sense to you?" Michael finally asked while holding an old photograph of the three of us standing beside Grandma in the rose garden. I slowly shook my head. No. Mother believed fairness was one of the greatest forms of love. She repeated that lesson our entire lives. Michael carefully placed the photograph back into the album. Then either something changed that we never knew about, or we are missing part of the story. His words remained with me long after he went upstairs to prepare the guest room for the night. I stayed alone in the living room, staring at the family photographs covering the fireplace mantel. One picture immediately caught my attention. It had been taken nearly 15 years earlier during Grandma's 80th birthday celebration. She stood proudly in front of the farmhouse holding a small wooden box against her chest while smiling directly into the camera. I remembered that box. It was handcrafted by my grandfather decades before I was born. Grandma treasured it more than any piece of jewelry because she always said it protected the family's most important memories. As children, Caroline, Michael, and I often asked what was inside. Grandma would simply smile and reply, "Only things that should be opened when the time is right." I had not thought about those words in years. The memory felt strangely vivid now. Early the next morning I woke before sunrise and stepped onto the front porch with a cup of coffee. Mist drifted gently across the flower garden while birds welcomed the new day from the branches of the old maple tree. Everything appeared peaceful, yet my thoughts refused to settle. As I looked toward the side of the farmhouse, I noticed the small upstairs window belonging to Grandma's old bedroom. The curtains had remained closed since she passed away several years earlier. Suddenly I remembered something else. During her final Thanksgiving at the farmhouse, Grandma had quietly asked me to promise that her room would never be emptied in a hurry after she was gone. At the time I assumed she was speaking from sentiment. Standing there in the cool morning air, that request suddenly felt less like nostalgia and more like careful preparation. I finished my coffee, walked back inside, and quietly climbed the narrow wooden staircase. As I reached the hallway outside Grandma's bedroom, I rested my hand on the old brass doorknob. Something deep inside me whispered that whatever waited behind that door would not simply answer questions about an inheritance. It might explain why Grandma believed the truth sometimes waits patiently until a family is finally ready to hear it. The brass doorknob turned with a soft click, and a faint scent of lavender greeted me as I stepped into Grandma's bedroom. Time seemed to have paused inside those four walls. Her quilt remained neatly spread across the bed, an old rocking chair rested beside the window, and the shelves still held dozens of well-worn books she had read every winter. Dust floated gently through the morning sunlight, giving the room an almost peaceful stillness that felt untouched by the arguments beginning to divide our family downstairs. Michael quietly joined me a few moments later. Neither of us spoke. We simply looked around, respecting the space exactly as Grandma had always kept it. "Where do we even begin?" he asked in a whisper. I remembered something Grandma often said whenever she misplaced her reading glasses. The answer is usually where everyone forgets to look. Smiling at the memory, I began opening drawers carefully, not searching for valuables but hoping to understand why she had insisted her room should never be emptied in haste. Inside her dresser we found neatly folded sweaters, handwritten recipes, birthday cards from grandchildren, and carefully organized family photographs dating back more than 50 years. Everything reflected the woman we had always known. Kind. Thoughtful. Meticulous. Nothing explained the uneasy feeling that had brought me upstairs. Michael examined an old cedar chest near the foot of the bed while I dusted the bookshelves one volume at a time. Tucked between two family history books rested a small leather journal. My heart skipped for a moment as I opened it, only to discover it contained gardening notes, weather observations, and reminders about when to prune the roses behind the farmhouse. It was beautiful but unrelated to Mother's estate. We continued searching for another hour without success. Just as disappointment began replacing curiosity, Michael called my name. Hidden behind the rocking chair stood the same handcrafted wooden box I remembered from Grandma's birthday photograph years earlier. Time had darkened the walnut wood, but I immediately recognized the carved wildflowers decorating its lid. A small brass lock remained fastened across the front. We carried the box carefully to the bed and examined it from every angle. "Do you remember where she kept the key?" Michael asked. I closed my eyes, trying to picture Grandma sitting in this very room. Then another memory surfaced. Every evening before dinner she would wind the old mantel clock resting above her fireplace. Once she finished, she always paused for a brief moment, reached beneath the wooden base, and smiled to herself before leaving the room. At the time I assumed it was simply habit. Now it felt deliberate. I walked to the fireplace, lifted the heavy clock with both hands, and slowly reached underneath. My fingertips brushed against cool metal secured with faded tape that had nearly blended into the wood after so many years. I carefully removed a tiny brass key no longer than my little finger. Michael stared at it without saying a word. My hands trembled slightly as I returned to the bed and slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly despite the passing years. We slowly lifted the lid together. Inside rested several old family photographs tied with blue ribbon, a sealed ivory envelope with Grandma's elegant handwriting across the front, and beneath it another smaller packet wrapped carefully in linen cloth. Written across the envelope were only 7 simple words that instantly changed everything we believed about Mother's final wishes. It read, "To be opened only when the family forgets the truth." Michael and I exchanged a long, silent glance before either of us reached for the envelope. It was surprisingly light, sealed with faded wax that had cracked naturally with age but had never been broken. Grandma's elegant handwriting looked as steady as the day she had written those words, as though she had expected this exact moment years before it happened. I carefully opened the envelope without tearing it and unfolded several neatly written pages. The first sentence immediately caught my breath. Grandma explained that she was writing the letter because families sometimes become vulnerable after loss, and she feared that confusion, silence, or misplaced trust could one day divide the people she loved most. She wrote that every important decision should always be measured against a lifetime of actions rather than a single unexpected document. As I continued reading, her words felt less like a farewell and more like gentle guidance prepared for a future she somehow understood. She described how my mother believed deeply that each of her children should be treated with fairness, not because fairness guaranteed happiness, but because it preserved trust between brothers and sisters long after parents were gone. Michael leaned closer as I read each sentence aloud. Neither of us interrupted. Grandma's calm handwriting seemed to fill the quiet room with her familiar voice. Then we reached a paragraph that made us stop. She explained that if Mother's final wishes ever appeared inconsistent with the values she had lived by, we should never allow assumptions to replace careful investigation. Instead, she instructed us to examine every important family document before accepting appearances as truth. Folded behind the letter was another smaller sheet listing several specific items. Among them were Mother's original estate planning folder, an old safety deposit box at the local community bank, and a packet of legal papers that Grandma believed had been stored inside the farmhouse many years earlier. She even described where the packet had last been kept, inside a false wooden panel beneath the bottom drawer of an antique writing desk that still stood in Mother's downstairs study. My pulse quickened as Michael and I looked toward one another. Neither of us had ever known that the desk contained a hidden compartment. We carefully lifted the linen bundle that had rested beneath the envelope. Inside were several black and white family photographs, Grandpa's pocket watch, and an old brass key attached to a faded paper tag. Written neatly across the tag were the words, "Safety Deposit Box 7." Grandma had dated the note almost 8 years earlier. Michael slowly exhaled. She planned for us to find this someday. I nodded without taking my eyes off the letter. She did not tell us what we would discover. She only wanted us to keep searching. We carried everything downstairs and placed the documents carefully across Mother's dining table. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating the handwritten pages beside family photographs spanning 3 generations. Looking at those pictures, I realized every smile represented people who had trusted one another long before lawyers, wills, and property ever entered the conversation. Just then the sound of tires crunching across the gravel driveway echoed outside. A familiar sedan pulled to a stop near the front porch. Through the window I recognized Caroline stepping out while holding a folder beneath her arm. She looked determined, confident, and completely unaware that hidden inside Grandma's bedroom we had already uncovered the first pieces of a story she had never expected anyone else to read. Caroline entered the farmhouse with the same composed expression she had worn the day before, placing her folder neatly on the dining table before looking at Michael and me. "I thought we should begin discussing the next steps," she said politely. "There will be paperwork to complete, and I would rather handle everything respectfully." Her voice was calm, but I noticed her eyes briefly settle on the documents spread across the table before returning to my face. She had clearly expected to find us grieving, not studying old family papers. "Before we discuss anything," I replied gently, "there are some things Grandma wanted us to read." For the first time since Mother's funeral, uncertainty crossed Caroline's face. She glanced at the familiar handwriting resting beside the photographs and frowned slightly. "Where did you find those?" she asked. "In Grandma's room," Michael answered honestly. "Inside the wooden box she always protected." Caroline remained silent for several seconds before quietly pulling out a chair. I handed her Grandma's letter without accusation or anger. She read every page carefully, her confident expression slowly fading into thoughtful silence. When she finished, she folded the pages with remarkable care and placed them back on the table. "I did not know this letter existed," she admitted softly. I believed her. Whatever secret surrounded Mother's estate, the surprise on Caroline's face seemed genuine. I then showed her the handwritten list mentioning the hidden compartment inside Mother's antique writing desk. She stared at it before whispering, "I have never heard Mother mention any hidden compartment." Together we walked into Mother's downstairs study. The room overlooked the backyard where roses still bloomed despite the changing season. The antique oak writing desk stood beside the window exactly where it had remained for decades. Mother often paid household bills there, wrote birthday cards, and recorded family recipes inside neat spiral notebooks. I carefully removed the bottom drawer exactly as Grandma had instructed. At first nothing appeared unusual. Then Michael noticed a narrow wooden strip along the back panel that looked slightly different from the surrounding wood grain. Pressing gently against it caused the panel to slide open almost effortlessly. Hidden inside rested a large brown envelope sealed with Mother's signature across the flap. No one moved. It felt almost impossible that such an important document had remained hidden only a few feet from us for so many years. Caroline slowly covered her mouth with one hand. "I never knew," she whispered. I nodded quietly. "Neither did we." We carried the envelope back to the dining table and carefully broke the aging seal. Inside were several legal documents, handwritten notes, and copies of correspondence between Mother and Mr. Harrison dating back almost 6 years. The earliest letter explained that Mother had begun reviewing her estate plan after Grandpa's passing. Another document listed appointments that continued over several months, suggesting she had considered every decision thoughtfully rather than acting impulsively. Then Michael discovered a final folded page clipped separately from the rest. Unlike the other documents, this page had been signed by Mother only months before her death. Across the top appeared a handwritten sentence that immediately captured everyone's attention. It read, "If you are reading this without the complete file from the bank, then you do not yet have the whole truth." Beneath those words Mother had written only one additional instruction. "Do not judge anyone until every document has been opened together." None of us spoke for several moments after reading Mother's final instruction. The words seemed simple, yet they changed the atmosphere inside the farmhouse completely. Until that moment I had believed our family was facing a dispute over an unexpected will. Now it felt as though Mother and Grandma had quietly prepared a path leading us toward something much larger than a disagreement about property. Caroline slowly lowered herself into the chair across from me. The confidence she had carried into the house earlier that morning had disappeared, replaced by genuine uncertainty. "If Mother wanted us to have the bank file before reaching any conclusions," she said softly, "then we need to see everything before making another decision." Michael nodded immediately. "I agree. No one should sign anything until we know the whole story." For the first time since the funeral, all three of us found ourselves united by the same goal instead of divided by suspicion. I carefully unfolded the paper tag attached to the brass key. Along with the number of the safety deposit box, Grandma had written the name of the small community bank where our parents had done business for decades. Fortunately, it was only a short drive from the farmhouse. We gathered the letters, Mother's notes, and the key into the wooden box before locking the farmhouse and driving into town together. The familiar streets looked unchanged despite everything our family was experiencing. We passed the library where Mother had volunteered every Saturday, the bakery where she bought cinnamon rolls for birthdays, and the church where we had said goodbye only the day before. Every familiar landmark reminded me that truth often hides beneath ordinary moments. The community bank occupied an old brick building that had served local families for generations. The branch manager, Mrs. Collins, recognized us immediately and offered her condolences before inviting us into a private office. When I explained that we had discovered a key belonging to Grandma along with written instructions, she carefully examined the paperwork before opening a secure file on her computer. Her expression became thoughtful. "Yes," she said after a few moments. "The safety deposit box is registered under your grandmother's name, with special access instructions prepared several years ago. According to these documents, after both your grandmother and your mother had passed away, the box could only be opened if all three children were present together." Caroline looked at Michael, then at me. None of us had expected another condition. Mrs. Collins continued reviewing the file before smiling gently. "You have satisfied those requirements today." She led us through a secure hallway to a small private viewing room before placing the metal deposit box on the table. "Please take as much time as you need," she said before quietly leaving us alone. The room fell completely silent. I inserted the brass key into the lock while Caroline signed the final access form and Michael steadied the box with both hands. As the lid slowly lifted, we found several carefully organized folders, an envelope addressed to Mr. Harrison, copies of financial records, and one thick sealed package bearing Mother's handwriting across the front. Unlike every document we had discovered so far, this package carried a sentence written in bold, unmistakable ink. It read, "This document must be read in the presence of my attorney before any inheritance is distributed." We stared at one another in complete disbelief because we all knew exactly what that meant. The process that everyone believed had already been completed had, according to Mother's own written instructions, never truly begun. Mrs. Collins escorted us back to her office, where she contacted Mr. Harrison immediately. Less than an hour later, our attorney arrived carrying the same worn leather briefcase that had seemed so ordinary only a day earlier. This time his expression was different. As soon as he saw the sealed package resting on the conference table beside the safety deposit box, he stopped walking. "Where did you find that?" he asked quietly. I explained everything from Grandma's hidden wooden box to the secret compartment inside Mother's writing desk and finally the document stored in the bank according to Grandma's instructions. Mr. Harrison listened without interrupting. When I finished, he removed his glasses and carefully examined Mother's handwriting across the sealed package. After a long silence, he nodded slowly. "I have not seen this package before," he admitted. "Your mother told me there were additional personal papers, but she instructed me that I was not to receive them unless all three of you appeared together after locating them yourselves." Caroline looked stunned. She expected us to find all of this. Mr. Harrison gave a thoughtful smile. "Knowing your mother, I believe she expected you to work together before learning the complete truth." His words settled heavily over the room. Only 24 hours earlier we had barely been speaking to one another. Now the very condition Mother had created required cooperation instead of suspicion. Mr. Harrison asked each of us whether we wished to proceed. We all answered yes. He carefully broke the remaining seal and unfolded the thick collection of papers. The first page was not a legal document at all. It was a handwritten letter from Mother addressed to her three children. She explained that if we were reading those pages together, then we had already demonstrated something more valuable than any inheritance. We had chosen patience instead of anger and truth instead of assumption. She wrote that appearances can deceive even the people who know one another best, which was why she had divided important information into separate places. No single person could discover everything alone. The following documents included updated financial records, correspondence with accountants, and detailed explanations of family investments stretching back several years. Everything had been organized with remarkable precision. Then Mr. Harrison reached a notarized statement attached near the center of the file. He paused before reading it aloud. According to the document, the will that had been presented at the farmhouse represented only one part of Mother's complete estate plan. Additional binding instructions existed within the sealed file and were legally incorporated by reference into the final distribution of her assets. Michael leaned forward. "Does that mean the inheritance has not actually been finalized?" Mr. Harrison looked directly at each of us before answering. "That is exactly what it means. The reading at the farmhouse was incomplete because this file was intentionally withheld until your mother's conditions had been fulfilled. Caroline slowly closed her eyes as though replaying every painful conversation from the previous day. I realized that all of us had judged one another based upon only a fraction of the truth. Mr. Harrison carefully turned to the next notarized page. The remaining instructions, he said, will determine exactly how every asset is to be distributed. As he prepared to read the first sentence, none of us could have imagined that Mother's greatest surprise was not hidden inside the inheritance itself but inside the remarkable reason she had arranged everything this way from the very beginning. Mr. Harrison adjusted the stack of papers before him and slowly began reading Mother's final legal instructions. Every sentence seemed carefully chosen, as though she had anticipated every misunderstanding our family might face after her passing. She explained that the document presented at the farmhouse had never been intended to stand alone. It had been created as the first step in a process designed to reveal something far more important than the distribution of property. The attorney then unfolded another notarized statement bearing Mother's signature and the signatures of 2 witnesses. According to this document, Caroline had indeed been named temporary trustee over the estate immediately following Mother's death, but only until every condition outlined in the complete estate plan had been satisfied. She had not been appointed sole heir. She had been entrusted with protecting the family's assets until the entire file could be opened. Caroline looked up in complete surprise. "I never knew that," she whispered. Mr. Harrison nodded. "The legal authority granted to you was administrative, not permanent ownership." A deep silence settled over the room as years of assumptions quietly disappeared. Mother had trusted Caroline with responsibility, not privilege. The attorney continued reading. Mother wrote that she had chosen Caroline because she believed her oldest daughter possessed the patience and organizational skills necessary to protect the estate during what she feared would become an emotional period for the family. She added that she intentionally chose not to explain this arrangement beforehand because she wanted every child to demonstrate character before receiving answers. She feared that advanced knowledge might influence natural reactions and permanently damage relationships built over a lifetime. Michael slowly leaned back in his chair. "So this was never about choosing favorites," he said quietly. "No," Mr. Harrison replied. "Your mother repeatedly states that fairness remained her highest priority." He then opened the financial records contained in the package. The document showed that nearly every major asset had been placed into a family trust several years earlier. The farmhouse, investment accounts, savings, and even Mother's collection of antique jewelry were listed under the trust rather than the individual will we had first heard. The earlier document had revealed only temporary administrative instructions while concealing the true structure of the estate. Mother had separated the records deliberately so no single paper could tell the complete story. Then Mr. Harrison reached another handwritten letter addressed specifically to Caroline. He asked whether she wished him to read it aloud. She hesitated before quietly nodding. Mother's words immediately brought tears to her eyes. She thanked Caroline for years of helping with medical appointments, managing household paperwork, and carrying responsibilities that often went unnoticed by the rest of the family. She explained that appointing Caroline as temporary trustee was never intended as a reward, but as recognition of her dependability. She also warned that the role would likely place her in an uncomfortable position and asked her to accept misunderstanding with patience until the truth could eventually be revealed. Caroline lowered her head and gently wiped away tears she had been trying to hide since the funeral. Looking back over the previous 2 days, I suddenly remembered every suspicious glance I had directed toward my sister and felt ashamed. Before anyone could speak, Mr. Harrison carefully turned to the final section of Mother's estate plan. The remaining pages, he said softly, contain the actual instructions for dividing every asset among the family. He paused for a brief moment before adding one sentence that immediately captured all of our attention. "Your mother also attached one final personal condition that none of you could have anticipated." Mr. Harrison carefully turned the final pages and began reading the last section of Mother's estate plan with a calm voice that filled the quiet conference room. Mother explained that every financial asset, every investment account, every dollar in savings, and every valuable possession would ultimately be divided equally among Caroline, Michael, and me. The family trust required that each of us receive the same share after all legal obligations had been completed. There were no hidden percentages, no secret beneficiary, and no special reward waiting for one child over another. Mother wrote that equality had always been her intention because she believed love could never be measured by money. She reminded us that throughout our childhood she had tried to celebrate each success without comparing one child to another, and she wanted her final gift to reflect the same principle. I looked toward Caroline and saw relief slowly replacing the weight she had carried since the funeral. Michael quietly smiled for the first time in days. Yet Mr. Harrison did not stop reading. He explained that Mother had attached one final personal instruction to the legal distribution of the estate. Although it carried no financial requirement, she described it as the most important part of her legacy. According to her written request, the farmhouse could not be sold immediately after the inheritance was completed. Instead, she asked that the three of us spend one final weekend together inside the house before making any decision about its future. During that weekend she wanted us to open every family photograph album, prepare one meal together using Grandma's handwritten recipes, and walk beneath the old maple tree where generations of our family had gathered every autumn. She wrote that memories deserved one final chance to speak before business decisions replaced them forever. None of us expected such a request. It sounded simple, yet every sentence reflected Mother's understanding that families often lose one another not because of money but because they stop sharing ordinary moments together. Mr. Harrison then unfolded the last handwritten page in the file. It contained no legal language at all. Mother explained that she had watched many families become strangers after settling an estate. Some argued over furniture. Others argued over land. Many never spoke again. She refused to let that become our story if she could help prevent it. That was why she had hidden the truth in separate places. The only way to uncover everything was through patience, cooperation, and trust. She believed that if we could accomplish those things together while grieving, then we could preserve our family long after she was gone. Caroline quietly reached across the table and took my hand. A moment later Michael placed his hand beside ours. No one said anything because no words felt large enough for what had just happened. The inheritance we had spent days fearing had never been designed to separate us. It had been carefully constructed to expose our misunderstandings before restoring our trust. As Mr. Harrison gathered the papers into a single organized file, he smiled gently and said there was only one remaining item left inside the safety deposit box that had not yet been examined. We looked down together and noticed a small velvet pouch resting unnoticed beneath the stack of legal documents. Attached to it was one final handwritten note from Mother that simply read, "This belongs to the future of our family, not its past." Mr. Harrison carefully untied the ribbon around the small velvet pouch and gently emptied its contents onto the polished conference table. Inside lay 3 identical silver keys attached to matching engraved tags and one folded letter written in Mother's unmistakable handwriting. None of the keys appeared expensive, yet they had been polished so carefully that they reflected the afternoon sunlight coming through the office window. Mother began her final message by explaining that she had chosen the keys because every family needs reminders that some doors can only be opened together. She wrote that each key belonged to one of us, but no single key represented ownership over property or money. Instead, they symbolized equal responsibility for protecting the family's future. Michael quietly picked up one key while Caroline examined another. I held the third in my hand and noticed a tiny maple leaf engraved on its surface, matching the tree that had watched over our family for decades. Mother explained that the keys opened 3 matching wooden memory chests stored inside the attic of the farmhouse. She had prepared them over many years, filling each chest with photographs, letters, holiday recipes, childhood drawings, and personal memories intended for future generations rather than for ourselves. She wanted her grandchildren, and every child who came after them, to understand where their family had come from long after those who created those memories were gone. The silver keys were not gifts for the present. They were invitations to become caretakers of the family's history. Caroline quietly smiled through tears. She was still thinking about people she might never even meet, she whispered. Mr. Harrison nodded. That sounds exactly like your mother. We returned to the farmhouse that same afternoon carrying the completed estate file, Grandma's wooden keepsake box, and the 3 silver keys. The house felt different now. It no longer seemed filled with unanswered questions. Instead, every familiar room reminded me of ordinary moments that had quietly become extraordinary memories. We climbed the narrow staircase leading into the attic where old trunks, quilts, and holiday decorations had remained untouched for years. Near the far wall beneath a small round window stood 3 handcrafted cedar chests arranged side by side. Each bore one of our names carved into a small brass plate. None of us remembered seeing them before. Mother must have placed them there years earlier without saying a word. We unlocked the chests together. Inside mine rested school report cards, birthday cards, photographs of family vacations, newspaper clippings from local events, and dozens of handwritten letters Mother had written but never mailed. Michael found similar treasures preserving moments from his own life, while Caroline discovered carefully organized memories reaching back to her earliest childhood. We laughed as forgotten stories returned one after another. Some photographs captured muddy fishing trips with Grandpa. Others showed Grandma teaching us how to bake pies in the old kitchen. Every item reminded us that the richest inheritance we possessed had never been listed inside a legal document. Hours passed without any of us noticing the time. As evening settled outside the attic window, we carried several albums downstairs and gathered around the dining table exactly as Mother had hoped we would. Looking across at my brother and sister, I realized the distance that had separated us only days earlier had quietly disappeared. Then I unfolded one final letter resting at the bottom of my cedar chest. Across the top Mother had written a sentence that made my heart stop for just a moment. It read, "If you are reading this together, then my greatest wish has already come true, but there is one last promise I hope you will make to one another before this story truly ends." I unfolded Mother's final letter while Caroline and Michael sat quietly beside me at the old dining table where our family had shared countless meals through the years. Outside, the evening breeze gently stirred the leaves of the maple tree, and for the first time since the funeral, the farmhouse felt peaceful instead of heavy with unanswered questions. Mother's handwriting was steady, warm, and familiar. She thanked us for staying together long enough to discover the complete truth instead of allowing grief to separate us. She wrote that the promise she hoped we would make had nothing to do with money, property, or legal documents. Instead, she asked us to promise that every future disagreement within our family would begin with a conversation rather than an assumption. She reminded us that silence often creates stories that are not true, while honest conversations give love the opportunity to survive even difficult seasons. She wrote that the inheritance she valued most was not the farmhouse, the savings, or the investments. Her greatest inheritance was the relationship between her children, because that was the only gift capable of growing stronger as it was shared. Mother explained that she had watched Grandma preserve their family through difficult years by choosing forgiveness over pride, patience over anger, and understanding over suspicion. She hoped we would continue that tradition for the generations who would one day gather beneath the same maple tree. After I finished reading, none of us spoke for several moments. Then Caroline quietly reached across the table. "I promise," she said with tears in her eyes. "No more assumptions." Michael smiled gently before placing his hand over hers. "I promise too." I looked around the room that had witnessed birthdays, holidays, laughter, and now healing. "I promise," I whispered. At that moment it felt as though Mother's final wish had become something real rather than words written on paper. We spent the remainder of the weekend exactly as she had requested. We opened every old photograph album and laughed over hairstyles, camping trips, school plays, and fishing adventures with Grandpa. We prepared Grandma's chicken pot pie using her handwritten recipe, making the same small mistakes she used to laugh about before finally serving dinner around the same wooden table. On Sunday afternoon we carried folding chairs beneath the maple tree and shared stories we had never taken the time to tell one another before. We realized that each of us remembered the same childhood through different eyes, and together those memories created a richer family history than any one person could preserve alone. Weeks later the legal paperwork was completed exactly as Mother had planned. Every financial asset was divided equally among the 3 of us. Together we decided not to sell the farmhouse. Instead, we placed it inside the family trust so future generations would always have a place to gather. The attic memory chests remained where Mother had left them, waiting for children and grandchildren who would someday unlock them with the silver keys she had prepared so many years earlier. Sometimes I still think back to the afternoon when I believed my sister had taken everything our mother left behind. I understand now that the greatest misunderstanding in our family became the very path that led us back to one another. Grandma's hidden letter did far more than uncover forgotten documents. It revealed the truth Mother had quietly protected all along, that an inheritance measured only by money will eventually be spent, but an inheritance built upon trust, forgiveness, and shared memories can enrich a family for generations, and in the end that became the most valuable legacy any of us could have ever received. Nearly 1 year passed before I truly understood the full meaning of everything Mother and Grandma had carefully arranged. The legal documents had been signed, the trust had been established, and life slowly returned to an ordinary rhythm, yet the farmhouse never again felt like a place defined by loss. Instead, it became the place where our family chose to begin again. Every autumn, just as Mother had hoped, Caroline, Michael, and I gathered beneath the old maple tree with our families. We brought homemade meals prepared from Grandma's recipes, opened the cedar memory chests, and added new photographs beside the old ones. The silver keys no longer represented hidden mysteries. They had become quiet reminders that every generation inherits more than money. They inherit stories, values, forgiveness, and the responsibility to pass those gifts forward. One afternoon, while organizing another collection of family photographs in the attic, Caroline discovered a small envelope tucked inside the back cover of an old photo album. It was addressed simply, "To whoever believes this family story has ended." We smiled at one another before carefully opening it together. Inside was a single handwritten note from Grandma that had somehow escaped all of our earlier searches. Her message was short, yet it captured everything we had learned over the past year. She wrote that families are not tested when life is easy. They are tested when grief, confusion, and fear make trust feel impossible. She reminded us that the truth rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it waits patiently behind ordinary doors until people are ready to open them with kindness instead of anger. Reading those words beneath the familiar wooden beams of the attic felt almost like hearing her voice once more. Michael quietly laughed and said Grandma had managed to surprise us again even after all this time. We placed her final note inside the walnut keepsake box beside Mother's letters so it would remain part of our family's history. Before leaving the attic, I looked through the small round window toward the maple tree standing proudly in the afternoon sunlight. Children were running across the yard, laughing in exactly the same place where we had once played together decades earlier. For a moment I realized that they knew nothing about the misunderstanding that had almost separated our family forever, and I hoped they never would. Instead, they would inherit a different story, one about siblings who found their way back to one another because two remarkable women refused to let love be buried beneath assumptions. Looking back now, I no longer remember the inheritance as bank accounts, legal papers, or property deeds. I remember an ivory envelope hidden inside a walnut keepsake box, a brass key beneath an old mantel clock, a forgotten safety deposit box, 3 silver keys resting inside a velvet pouch, and the courage to keep searching when the first answer seemed painfully unfair. Most of all, I remember the lesson Mother quietly left behind. The greatest danger to any family is not the loss of money but the loss of trust, because wealth can always be rebuilt while broken relationships are far more difficult to restore. Thanks to Mother's wisdom and Grandma's patience, our family received both a financial inheritance and something infinitely more valuable. We received another chance to choose one another, and that became the legacy that would continue long after every document had faded, every letter had yellowed with age, and every generation gathered beneath the same faithful maple tree to remember where it all began. Several years have passed since the day our family nearly allowed one incomplete document to destroy a lifetime of love, and even now I still find myself thinking about the quiet wisdom hidden inside Mother's plan. The farmhouse remains exactly where it has always stood, surrounded by the familiar fields, the old porch, the weathered fence, and the faithful maple tree whose branches now provide shade for a new generation of children. Every autumn our family returns there, not because a legal document requires it, but because the tradition has become part of who we are. Caroline arrives carrying Grandma's handwritten recipe book. Michael always brings old family photographs that somehow continue appearing from forgotten boxes and albums. I unlock the walnut keepsake box and carefully place Mother's letters beside Grandma's final note so everyone can read them again whenever they choose. None of us has memorized every word, yet every visit reminds us of something new. The letters seem to grow wiser as our own lives become more complicated. We often laugh about how convinced we once were that Caroline had stolen everything Mother intended to leave behind. Looking back, it feels almost impossible that a misunderstanding could have grown so large in such a short time. Yet that memory has become one of the greatest lessons we pass on to our children. We explain that people should never build permanent conclusions from temporary information, because truth sometimes arrives one careful step at a time. The family trust continues to protect the farmhouse exactly as Mother intended. Birthdays, anniversaries, Thanksgiving dinners, and summer reunions have filled its rooms with laughter once again. The cedar memory chests in the attic have slowly become larger as each generation adds photographs, handwritten letters, school awards, favorite recipes, and stories from their own lives. The 3 silver keys are still passed among us during every gathering, reminding each person that family history belongs to everyone equally. Even Mr. Harrison occasionally visits our annual reunion. He often smiles when he sees children running beneath the maple tree, telling us that he has handled many estates during his career but has never witnessed another family transformed so completely by one carefully designed inheritance plan. Mrs. Collins from the hometown bank sends holiday cards every December, saying she still remembers the afternoon when 3 uncertain siblings walked into her office carrying more questions than answers. She tells us it remains one of the most meaningful days of her professional life because she watched a family choose reconciliation instead of resentment. Sometimes visitors ask why we never sold such a valuable property. We simply smile and tell them that some places become priceless because of the memories they protect rather than the dollars they could bring. That answer always reminds me of Mother's final lesson. Wealth can purchase comfort, but it cannot replace trust once it has been lost. Property can be divided with signatures, yet love survives only through daily choices made with patience and understanding. Whenever I stand beneath the maple tree as the autumn leaves drift gently across the yard, I realize that Grandma's hidden letter never truly changed our inheritance. It changed our hearts. The farmhouse became more than a family home. It became living proof that forgiveness can outlast misunderstanding, truth can overcome suspicion, and the greatest legacy anyone leaves behind is not measured by what rests inside a bank account but by the relationships that continue to flourish long after every legal document has been carefully placed back inside its box.